welcome to Wrestling at Random. I'm Jeremy Deemer.
And I am Adam Summers.
And this is the podcast where every week we review a classic weekly television show from a streaming service.
That classic weekly television show could be from anywhere throughout the world, any time period. We have dumped thousands upon thousands of hours of pro wrestling weekly television into the randomizer. I don't know if we can shake up the randomizer since it's technically living inside of a computer, but we're metaphorically shaking the randomizer up vigorously, pull a number out. That number corresponds to a show, and that's what we watch. And yeah, we're going to get into it in a few minutes. I know you have a few other things to say as always, but my God, if anyone ever wondered if this show was legitimately randomly generated or not, you'll get your answer.
Yeah, no human being would pick to watch this show. But we usually get weekly TV shows here in Season 2. Season 1, completely dedicated to major events, pay-per-views, Clash of Champions, Saturday Night's Main Event. You can find all those in the back catalog in Season 1. Just because you're listening to them now doesn't mean that they're old. This is evergreen content. It's new to you. It's just like it came out this week. So go back to the archives, listen to any of those shows. Season 2, we focus, we filtered the randomizer down to just television shows. And for any of those weird things that don't quite fit into Season 2's format that show up in the randomizer, we throw that onto our Patreon feed. You can support the show via patreon.com/wrestlingatrandom. There we release bonus content every single Thursday. There's a whole bonus feed. You get the free show on Sunday, completely different, more content if you subscribe to that tier on Thursdays. We also have a tier where you can, you like to say, Adam, be the randomizer. You can executive produce the show.
And we already have, if you're listening to this in linear fashion and interested in checking out the Patreon, we already have 3 of those shows where listeners chose shows for us to watch or matches for us to watch. And that alone has been quite the journey, whether it be Shawn Michaels versus The Undertaker in the very first Hell in the Cell match from 1997, or one of the most recent editions of the Patreon exclusive version of the podcast where we reviewed Hustle 3, featuring top Japanese wrestlers in strange gimmicks, featuring Scott Hall and Kevin Nash wrestling Shinya Hashimoto and Naoya Ogawa, Cactus Jack versus Toshiaki Kawada for the Triple Crown in Hustle. So that's just a little bit of an example of the oddball content that you can find. We're getting near double digits already in Patreon bonus episodes. Those are exclusive to those people that support the show via Patreon, that tier. And yeah, also should mention, though, if you talked about Season 1, all those episodes going back talking about major events, pay-per-views, you can go back and listen to Season 1 right now completely for free. I believe it's 34 episodes on top of all the episodes you've already listened to or have sitting in the queue for Season 2. So plenty of free content. If you can't get enough of us, and honestly, why would you be able to? There's the Patreon right there for you.
That's right. And when you subscribe to the Patreon, every single new subscriber gets a couple of stickers with the Wrestling at Random logo, and you get a 90s random trading card of a WCW wrestler. So we mail those out to you, and that's for any tier. And then if you're, we have other tiers where you can get things like T-shirts too. We got fancy T-shirts, so you can always bump up to the big tier, get yourself some swag, and then go down to the bonus content tier and listen to all of the episodes, the hours of content that are out there as well. So with that, enough about us. As you go through and listen to the show, we do want to hear from you. We want to interact with you, all of our listeners, so make sure that you're following us on Twitter at WrestleAtRandom. And if you stay off of Twitter, because it is a cesspool, I understand, you can send us an email as well, wrestlingatrandom@gmail.com. All of the links for how to get in touch with the show, along with the entire back catalog, at wrestlingatrandom.com. And the randomizer this week spit out All Star Wrestling from Halloween October 31st, 1981. All Star Wrestling was the WWF's syndicated wrestling show, which ran from October of 1971 until August 30th, 1986.
And you just have to keep in mind, if you're listening to this, when we say WWF in 1981, that means that this is the WWF as a regional territory in the New York and surrounding areas. But this is pre-national expansion, and so if you're somehow watching along with us, when you saw that this was going to be the podcast, and maybe you had an idea of what this show would look like visually or presentation wise, thinking that it was a WWF show from the 80s. Oh boy, it's a little different.
No, it's more like a WWF show from what you would think of the 70s.
Yes.
They had not.
I feel like that extra W should be in there. This is a worldwide wrestling federation production, it feels like.
Yeah, in August of 86, then it was replaced by the shows you think of when you think of 80s WWF wrestling. It was replaced by Wrestling Challenge. And Challenge was actually the B show of the WWF syndicated programming. Superstars was the main A show for their syndicated programming.
And I don't think, Jeremy, ever got Challenge here in the Chicago area, where we both, at least by the mid 80s, grew up. As I've mentioned before, I spent my very early years in New Orleans, and then like 5-6 years old, moved to Chicago. But I don't remember ever having Challenge. We had Superstars.
We had Superstars on Saturday mornings.
Saturday mornings at 11 a.m. I remember my schedule it worked out very well, because you had Worldwide was on at 10, I believe. It was either Worldwide or maybe Worldwide was on Sundays. WCW yep. Pro Chicago. WCW Pro Chicago, which eventually was on WGN, that was on Saturdays at 10 a.m. And then you had Superstars right at 11. And then I always remember at noon seeing like the first millisecond, hearing the first bars of the opening for the sitcom Small Wonder, and then turning the channel off, turning the TV off immediately, because there was no more wrestling to watch.
So we mentioned that this show is 1981, and it opens with a very generic opening video.
Well, it's what it opens with is this thing that wrestling was obsessed with in the early 80s. I feel like it was because slow motion replays had just become a thing. And so, like we talked about with world class TV, a few years later in this decade, it opens with these super, super slow-mo shots of, guys like I believe we see Andre the Giant. We see Rocky Johnson hitting a couple very impressive drop kicks in super slow motion, a rare good use of slow-mo in early 80s wrestling TV. But yes, this was very 80s, very generic. I believe we probably had dubbed music here for the intro. And then the first thing we see a very young Vince McMahon, that being Vince McMahon Jr., who, would go on to lead the empire that was the WWF and WWE. He's joined by Pat Patterson. They are our broadcast duo for this show. And when it first started, when we first see these two men, I'm thinking, oh my God, they're the announcers for Hockey Night in Canada. They have these powder blue shirts with I believe it's like navy blue ties, and the only thing that's missing is the old vintage Hockey Night in Canada logo. I was assuming they were going to throw it down to Dick Irvin to do some interviews ringside or something. It was certainly a look to see these two men dressed exactly the same here.
We're told that we will see Adrian Adonis. We'll see the former tag team champions, Tony Garea and Rick Martel.
We were told we'll see a very unusual wrestler, Adrian Adonis, was how they said it.
I was super excited because we only caught a glimpse of early 80s Adrian Adonis in the Most Unusual Matches tape that we reviewed in season 1 when he was part of the Battle Royal. And yeah, I was excited. I said, I need more Adrian Adonis. Come on, randomizer. And we finally got some.
We were both blown away by him, that vintage of him compared to the very heavy, out of shape, sort of almost comedy joke Adrian Adonis. So yeah, very much looking forward to seeing that. Also looking forward to seeing Tony Garea as something other than a official in a suit trying to break up brawls in the 80s and 90s in the WWF. So
you'll be disappointed because he just seemed like that exact same guy, not in a suit.
Yes, exactly. Excited to see a young Rick Martel here.
We love Rick Martel, yeah.
There's something else I noticed very early on, which would become a theme throughout the show. There is a whistle going off in the background.
Oh my God, I hate that guy. I will rant about how much I hate that guy.
I think it may be plural. There's a particular point where I feel like I figured out what was going on, and it's hilarious and absurd.
Okay.
So we'll get there. But yes,
you'll
this
hear
whistle...
it too, because there will be clips in this show, and you will hear that stupid whistle. Don't be like, oh man, that really messed up the audio. That Deemer can't get it right. No, that is the annoying whistle we're talking about. You'll hear it later in the show.
It's also noteworthy that here in 1981, the WWF is bucking the trend of having the announcers at a table, at like a desk studio setup, like we've seen on so many of the territory TV shows that we've reviewed already on this season of the podcast. They're standing ringside, previewing what's going to be happening. So that all occurs. Then we go to the ring. And the first thing we hear is Vince McMahon say, and I quote, "Discretionary viewer participation is advised for this professional wrestling event."
Discretionary viewer participation is advised for the following pro wrestling exhibition.
Yeah, basically, don't try this at home.
But said in a way that almost no one would understand that that's what they were trying to communicate, which is perfect.
We joke about how Vince McMahon says things that no other human being would say. This is exactly what that is right here. Here's an example.
It might be the earliest evidence of this in the wild here. Where was this at? It was in New York. Do you have a name for this building?
Yes, this show is taped at the Hamburg Fieldhouse in Hamburg, Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay, yeah. I feel like they said that it was promoted by something about the New York State Athletic Commission, but maybe I misheard. I did hear that it was promoted by Phil Zacco.
Yes,
and then they read off every name of everyone on the commission. We see them then show the commissioners at ringside. We see the ringside timekeeper, the ringside doctor. Who's interesting.
Not, you always know it's a fake injury when the ringside doctor is Sergeant Slaughter or one of the old time wrestlers from the back. No, there's an actual physician at ringside here.
If you want more details on that, listen to our Hell in the Cell Patreon show from 1997, where we talk about Sergeant Slaughter tending to a downed photographer. If that's not a tease to get you to part with your money and support this podcast, I don't know what is. We then hear from a very young Gary Michael Capetta as the ring announcer.
Yes, the sweet sounds of ring announcer Gary Michael Capetta.
The dulcet tones.
Not the greatness that is a Howard Finkel, but definitely still one of the best, one of my favorites. I love hearing the voice of Gary Michael Capetta. It's just weird to hear him in a WWF setting because he's so much the voice of that late 80s, early 90s WCW, NWA.
For sure. No, he's the voice of my childhood that I associate as much as, like Tony Schiavone or Jim Ross with growing up watching the NWA and WCW. It was weird here, but it was even more weird hearing him on a couple of those matches from Philadelphia on that WWF Most Unusual Matches tape, because those were at least a little bit closer to like where the shows really felt like the WWF. So he didn't seem to fit. Whereas this just felt like some oddball thing that, but it was so weird to hear him and not see like the WCW ring skirt. So we see two men in the ring. One man is Angelo Gomez, and the other man is a young man named Barry Hart. That is the guy who we saw on the NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida as Jack Hart, who would go on to later wrestle as Barry Horowitz.
That's right. As soon as I saw Barry Hart, you had told me about this was young Barry Horowitz for the Championship Wrestling in Florida. So he's 4 years prior to that, even younger than we were talking about a young Barry Horowitz.
I had no idea he was
Barry Hart.
Even around in 1981. And yeah, it was sort of the amalgamation of both of his later names. He was Barry Hart. He would go on to be Jack Hart. Then he would be Barry Horowitz later on. Their opponents are the new World Wrestling Federation Tag Team Champions, Mr. Fuji and Mr. Saito, accompanied to the ring by their manager, the guiding light, Lou Albano.
Captain Lou Albano, bringing out Team Mr. the WWF Tag Team Champions, Mr. Fuji and Mr. Saito.
Also, quick fashion report on Mr. Fuji and Mr. Saito. They looked more like they were like the 11th and 12th man on the LA Lakers than they were the WWF Tag Team Champions. They had a sweet matching yellow and purple vibe.
But I did appreciate the matching gear for the Tag Team Champions.
Yes, I noted that as well.
Absolutely. And even Albano had on he had on flip-flops, which was gross, and his big fat belly hanging out of his open shirt, also gross.
It's only he can do. I also wanted to bring up, and I assume you noticed this as well, that the jobber tag team of Barry Hart and Angelo Gomez had matching gear of sorts as well. Basic black red trunks. I don't know how you want to handle this, because I know this is a family show, so we usually don't swear. So I will do my best. I will do my best to do this in a at least PG-13 way rather than an rated R way. The crowd is very well mic'd up. They're not loud at all, but individual people in this very quiet rec center cut through the audio mix very clearly. And as the match is about to start, these fans, and by fans I mean two, because you can hear two individual voices, are really getting on Lou Albano. And you hear one man yell, "Eat," I'll just say crap, at Lou Albano. And then another guy yells, "Hey, Albano, right here, MFer."
Yeah, it was very clear and very loud.
And they made no effort to take this out of this taped show. No effort whatsoever. And this is a show that I assume was airing on like broadcast stations in the area.
Saito starts by just destroying Gomez. And then
can we talk for a second about how exciting it was to see Mr. Saito here in 1981? I had no expectation that I would be seeing him here on this show, and I loved Mr. Saito growing up. He was a guy who, while he wasn't as flashy as like a Great Muta or a Jushin Liger, you know, the few times that he got brought into WCW, I go back to him teaming with the Great Muta at Starrcade 90 in the Pat O'Connor International Memorial Tag Team Tournament. In a way, seeing him was also an introduction to Japanese pro wrestling, because it was like, okay, so it's not all just flashy guys doing high flying stuff. There's also guys that are going to hit you really hard and dump you on the top of your head. And so to see him here in 1981 in the WWF was pretty cool.
Yeah, and he was destroying Gomez, like laying in shots. Like he was like kicking the crap out of this guy. And it was
taking
awesome.
him down. As he's a great amateur wrestler, so he was taking him down and then just laying it in.
Yes, Saito was awesome here. And then he tags in Fuji, and Fuji is not good at
He's not
all.
good. And if you thought when listening to and potentially watching the shows that we've talked about where Mr. Fuji was, you know, I think back to the Primetime Wrestling episode from 1989, and we talk about just how like old and immobile Fuji is, and you think, oh, well, 8 years ago, if he's wrestling, there's got to be an appreciable difference. I look at 1989 Mr. Fuji on that Primetime Wrestling episode, and I think he could have done everything that 1981 Mr. Fuji did here.
Yeah, like you just watch some like really powerful kicks and strikes from Saito, and then you see the exact opposite from Fuji, like these weak kicks, just I don't want to say lazy, but it's just like not good. It's just nothing he did was good. And
no, nothing he did was good. Nothing looked impactful, and you could not have like a bigger difference between two tag team partners, because you had Saito, who everything he did, even those basic stuff, looked just brutal. In a good way. It looked, just physically intense and painful, and just what you'd want to see out of a guy wrestling that style. And then Fuji, even in 1981, looked like a manager trying to wrestle. You mentioned when he comes in, he at one point he gets tagged back in, he hits a chop, a weak kick, and a fan throws something in the ring, and another fan yells, "You're a bum!"
Saito, he throws Gomez Beal style across the ring. That was impressive. In comes Hart with Saito, and he puts Hart in the Tree of Woe and then continues the beatdown in the corner. Lots of stomps and kicks.
He muscled him up for that Tree of Woe. Like, if you were watching, and I'll say Pride because this was in a ring and not in a cage, but if you were watching Pride Fighting Championships and one legitimate fighter tried to put another legitimate fighter into the corner in the Tree of Woe in an MMA fight, it's what it would look like here. He muscled him up and just imposed his will and dominance to get him into that corner and then start stomping on him.
One of my favorite things in squash matches is when the jobber tries to throw punches and it completely gets no-sold. And we got to see that here. I highly enjoyed that.
How about also, we get maybe the best line from Vince on the show. As this is happening, as Barry Hart is just not having any effect. His punches aren't having any effect on Saito. We get a shot of Lou Albano, and you can only say it as looking slovenly. And Vince says, "Look at that."
Ugh. Vince calls Saito's boots controversial, and I don't know why. They look just like socks.
They're just short black wrestling boots. I was trying to look real close and see if they were like the Iron Sheik with those like curved
no, they were like
spike sort of
like
things.
Amateur wrestling boots, but like all one color, so they like amateur wrestling shoes that are all one color, so they look like just socks. They're very tight on the feet.
Yeah.
I'm like what is controversial about this?
Like, was not having visible laces in your boots a controversial thing in 1981? I'm not sure. It seems strange. I did love that we saw Mr. Saito here with a couple of vicious Mongolian chops. I'm always a fan of that. We do actually get a couple wrestling moves here from Mr. Fuji when he tags back in. He hits a back suplex and a nice gut wrench suplex before tagging in Mr. Saito.
Yeah, finish comes when Fuji hits a sloppy Samoan drop on Barry Hart, gets the 3 count.
Vince just calls the drop.
5 minutes, 59 seconds was his match.
And we know that because Gary Michael Capetta, after this match and every match, reads the time. Which
usually I have to look it up after I watch the show. It was very handy. I was like, "Oh, thank you, Gary Michael Capetta. You saved me some post-production. Thank you."
We should give him a production assistant credit on this episode. And he doesn't even have to pay to be the randomizer or be the executive producer. We'll give him that credit. I also I don't know if you noticed Lou Albano yelling gibberish that he said was Japanese.
Yeah.
as Vince talks about that Lou Albano may be more proficient in Japanese than he is in English. Vince sounded so bored, though, as he called the finish of this match, just bored to tears. I did enjoy him saying, though, Louis Albano. I don't know why that amused me so much, but just hearing him say that in such a monotone fashion brought me great joy. We then, as we're going to commercial, randomly get a super slow motion replay of one of Mr. Fuji's very light kicks.
Yeah, it's so bad.
Why?
God, what a bad choice. You had Saito, any one of his kicks would have been a million times better than that. Awful.
Yes, it was as if they said, let's pick the thing for this match that most exposes the business in 1981, and let's put it in slow-mo because we have this new technology to use.
After commercial, in the ring, they're doing ring introductions, and the first ring introduction is for the manager, the Hollywood fashion plate, classy Freddie Blassie. I get it. Yeah, that's a good... You introduce him, he's a big star. But then they don't introduce the guy he's managing.
This was so weird.
They introduced the jobber next.
It bothered me so much. I was so confused. I have never, in, again, 36 years since I was a very, very small child, 36 years of watching professional wrestling, I have never seen this done before, where the manager gets introduced, then the jobber gets introduced, then the manager's charge gets introduced. So weird.
It's so weird. So Jerry Johnson is introduced, and his opponent is Killer Khan. And
a first, I believe, for seeing Killer Khan here on the podcast.
Yeah, now I remember Killer Khan as like, he eventually would just become a jobber later on in in the 80s. But here, he's new to the territory. He's managed by Freddie Blassie. This is big time here. So he's
also, for our for the Big Audio and Nightmare listeners of this podcast, I just have to throw this out there. He's the Great O'Khan.
You owe an apology to the Great O'Khan because
the Great O'Khan. When I say that, I mean he, like, when you watch a show,
gimmick, correct?
You watch a TV show, and at the start it says the events on this television program are inspired by actual events. That is the Great O'Khan is inspired by Killer Khan. It ends there, but just as we'll see in this match, just the things Killer Khan was doing, like every time he throws a strike, he's screaming.
Oh my God,
he's got the same haircut. I loved it. Killer Khan was terrible here, and I loved every second of him being terrible. It brought me great joy. I have no answer for you as to why, but I
extremely similar when we talk about the Great O'Khan. So this is
fine. Exactly.
Kicks from Killer Khan, and then he starts pulling at the face of his opponent, which that's an accurate description. Like, it's the one thing I enjoy about some of these bad 80s heels is that, like, they don't do any moves, they don't do anything well, but the thing they do well is, as a heel, all the things that are just dirty, mean, nasty things that now when heels do them, it's just like they're going through the motions. Here, it appears as though, Killer Khan is trying to rip Jerry Johnson's face off of his face. Lots of screaming by Khan every time he does a move. Khan goes off the rope to get a running start on a kick, and this is the first time I noticed just how these had to be the loosest ropes I've ever seen.
It was terrifying. Yeah, he hits this really hard hip toss, then he bounces off the ropes, and he almost falls over the ropes or through the ropes to the floor. We've talked about before, how the WWF had the actual ropes rather than these steel cables in the NWA and WCW. But here, these are so much more flimsy than even the WWF ropes we'd see years later. It's almost as if he was trying to bounce off of the ropes in a boxing ring, but they didn't have that fourth rope to keep people from falling out.
No, yeah, these ropes were so loose. It's if the Hamburg Fieldhouse's air conditioning was up too high, you'd see the ropes blowing in the wind here.
Yes, that is a. Or if he screamed too loud, it might have blown the ropes right off the turnbuckles. It did not help that he's a tall man with a relatively high center of gravity, which is probably the worst combination to for these type of ropes. And he really leaned into them too. And it kind of reminded me as a kid when you had you had your action figures and then you had your wrestling ring for the action figures. And sometimes you just get a little too fired up and you bounce Demolition Axe off the ropes and you do it too hard and the entire ring would flip up and land upside down. I expected that to happen and Killer Khan to be under, but still like screaming as he tried to like chop his way out.
A backbreaker by Khan, but he picks up his opponent at 2, toying with him as Blassie takes this opportunity to come and join on commentary. So you can't see where Vince McMahon and Pat Patterson are positioned, but you just see like Blassie walk like toward the hard camera and then disappear. It's like he's
walking toward us. It was a unique viewpoint. It was as if when Rick Rude found that camera and started unbuttoning his shirt to show off his abs, it was as if he just would keep walking towards the camera.
That's right.
Instead of stopping. We're referring to that NWA Championship Wrestling from Florida show that we reviewed if you have not listened to that podcast yet. But a chasm of difference between the physical features of one Rick Rude and one classy Freddie Blassie.
So Blassie basically just rants about the idiot fans haven't learned to cheer for him yet.
Vince asks him why he's always surprised when the fans boo him, which I thought was a great question. And that's he's sort of Blassie seemed a little bit taken aback by this, so it took him a little bit to figure out what to say, but that was the answer that he came up with. While all this is going on, Killer Khan hits a nice double arm suplex. Then it's a huge jumping knee drop off the second rope, which like felt like it should have been the finish, but then he decides to hit a leg drop, and then that's the finish.
Yeah, this was boring. 4 minutes, 17 seconds.
I loved it.
Not good.
You know what my favorite part of this was, though? When Vince McMahon just randomly blurts out loudly, "What's the deal with Rick McGraw?" And then we eventually, Pat Patterson, who's just such a non-entity on commentary, Pat Patterson explains that Killer Khan took Rick McGraw out and knocked him out of the territory. But again, it just felt like Vince was so bored here. Yeah. And like a thought came into his head, Rick McGraw. And like he instantly was like, this is more exciting than what I'm watching. I am going to yell this.
So Gary Michael Capetta introduces us to the jobber already in the ring. His name is...
The mic descends from the ceiling first, which I loved. I felt like Howard Finkel maybe was up there lowering the microphone down to our good friend Gary Michael Capetta.
This man is introduced as Ringo.
Yeah, I was confused here because they say that he's from El Salvador, and at first I thought they said Gringo, and I'm like, wow, that's weird. But then they said Ringo, and then we hear later that he's Ron Ringo.
Yeah, Vince gives him a first name later, but the ring announcer only goes by Ringo. And then they announce his opponent.
By his manager, the manager of champions, the Grand Wizard of Wrestling. From Seattle, Washington, weighing 247 pounds, he's the master of the figure 4 leg lock, Greg the Hammer Valentine.
Damn it, Greg the Hammer Valentine? Really?
It's your guy, a man who we've seen intermittently, probably more than intermittently, definitely more than you would like to see him throughout both seasons of this podcast. Thankfully, unlike the most unusual matches tape that we reviewed, he's only in one match on this show.
Yeah,
so
that was the biggest troll job the randomizer ever did to me, was give me a show that had 2 Greg the Hammer Valentine matches. I didn't realize I don't care for Greg the Hammer Valentine until we started doing this. But I had no beef with Hammer until we started doing this podcast. And then I quickly learned that I do not care for Greg the Hammer Valentine.
It's funny because we've had so many things where, like, on the other end, positive things we've talked about before. Big Cat Ernie Ladd, or we'll talk about Adrian Adonis coming up. Just a couple examples of guys that we didn't know how much we loved them until we've seen them here on this podcast. I can deal with Greg the Hammer Valentine. He just kind of exists. He is a net negative in every way for you, I know.
Oh my gosh. He's also managed by the Grand Wizard. So just when I thought I couldn't hate the Hammer anymore, I have no tolerance for the Grand Wizard. I do not get it.
I've never gotten it. I'm 100% in agreement with you. And he might be the poster child of like guys you read about in the magazines, like when they would talk about the history of wrestling and talk about the greatest managers of all time. They talk about the Grand Wizard. Then I remember years later, like getting access to old tapes and watching stuff. And, you know, he to me is just like Paul Jones level. And that's not a compliment.
I don't get it. And what's also weird is that I know his name is Ernie Roth. You know, like, the Grand Wizard, very famous guy, but I don't know why we know him, because he's not very good. He wasn't a good promo at the end of this match.
Discernible skills.
He doesn't do anything outside the ring. He just looked ridiculous in a ridiculous costume. Let's take a quick fashion corner on the Grand Wizard.
Jesus. Yeah, I don't know how quick you can do a fashion corner on the Grand Wizard, but yeah, it is, I've used this phrase before. It's what the kids say, is a look.
It's like a sparkly multicolor, like actually every color in a turban, and then a plaid red suit jacket and lime green pants. It's like the randomizer picked someone's outfit.
Well, he also, don't forget about his black sunglasses, which have it has like a yellow nose to it.
Yeah, Vince was really hung up on these sunglasses. Couldn't stop talking about it.
Well, he said, and I quote, "The Grand Wizard looks like an unusual mosquito."
I think he was trying to make a fly reference, but it was just really weird.
This was juxtaposed by what Vince called, and rightfully so, the beautiful blue robe of Greg the Hammer Valentine here.
Yeah, no, it was just a generic blue robe.
Well, how about Ron Ringo's gear? We can't leave Fashion Corner without talking about Ron Ringo. He has this amazing, like, it's white. It's Andre the Giant style as far as the singlet. You know, it's the one strap and the short trunks. It's way too baggy, and there's a scorpion on it for some reason.
So Vince, first he calls him Ron Ringo, gives him a first name, and then him and Pat Patterson talk about the tattoo on Ringo's shoulder. And they're like, whoa, what is that? And I look at it, I'm like, looks like a scorpion to me, Vince. And it's not a good tattoo at all, but Vince and Pat cannot identify the bug on his shoulder. And then they finally figure out it's a scorpion. And
well, it's also great that he has a scorpion tattoo and he has a scorpion on his trunks.
Yes.
Dedicated to whatever this inspiration was.
The human intermission, Greg the Hammer Valentine goes to work with a front face lock. Sweet.
As he is wont to do.
Hot start.
He hits a drop toe hold, then a elbow drop to the back of the legs. Then he grapevines the legs. And this position, I won't even call it a hold, but this position goes on for a long time.
Ringo's on his stomach. Ringo's on his stomach. His legs are grapevine, and so they're crossed there. Yeah, and Hammer like reaches and like to put like a nerve hold on the trapezius of Ringo.
We'll get there. But how long did he have this hold on, you might ask? He had this hold on so long that two people in the crowd started dueling bird calls. That's what was going on. I am 100% convinced that what was going on with the whistle at this point in the match was people, like one person on one end of the arena was doing a bird call, and then a person on the other end of the arena was doing a bird call back. And we should note that there was no other sound coming from the crowd at this point. And to this point in the show, other than these individual people yelling insults at managers or people doing bird calls with their kazoos, the only crowd noise we're hearing.
These people, the entire show, seemed so put out to be at a wrestling show. Like, what a hassle it was to come here. Nobody's having a good time.
There were a few odd exceptions, which we'll get to later.
But so far, at this point in the show, just it's a zero. These guys are just like, oh yeah, it's like they were like going to work, not going to a wrestling show here. Like,
it's also noteworthy when you scan the crowd here. This is the oldest crowd I have ever seen at any show we've watched for this podcast, and one of the oldest crowds I've seen any show I've ever watched, period. There are so many old ladies in the crowd. There are a lot of groups of old men, so yeah, I guess even they weren't excited by the action here from Greg the Hammer Valentine. But as you said, he finally transitions from this having the two legs cross grapevine position to then, while he has him in that hold, he grabs a nerve hold.
Oh, just
and
awful.
This lasts for a while. Then he hits a patented Greg the Hammer Valentine elbow.
Even Vince chimes in and says, I've never seen this maneuver before because it's ridiculous. That's why you've never seen this maneuver before. Yeah.
It's a rest hold. It's literally a rest hold on top of a rest hold. He transitioned from rest to more rest.
Oh. Ringo gets thrown outside and he collapses like just a fat blob on the outside. That was
hard on his floor, and it's a basketball court floor, and he took it hard. They're back in. Hammer's hitting elbow smashes. He's hitting flying elbow drops to the knee. He's clearly setting up for the figure four. He hits a back suplex, an elbow drop, as there's one guy in the crowd that will not stop yelling for the figure four every moment of this match from this point forward. I don't know if it was just because there's options here. He either was a Greg the Hammer Valentine fan.
Nope.
He was a figure four fan.
Possibly, yeah.
Or he knew that the quickest way that this match could end would be if Greg the Hammer Valentine locked on the figure four immediately.
Guaranteed. It might have been me maybe I'm able to time travel in the future, and I went back to this moment, and I'm just yelling, "Figure four, this is boring," because these people were also yelling "boring." This is the first time we have a boring chant here
in 1981. We've talked about, like, on the Patreon show, one of the first things we reviewed was the New Japan show from, I believe it was 1982, with a Dynamite Kid versus Tiger Mask match. So excise that when we're talking about early 80s wrestling. But just imagine the normal fare for North American wrestling in 1981, what it would take to fall so below the expectations of fans that they would chant boring at you.
Boring. It's unbelievable. And every right to, because Hammer, he finishes working over the leg, and he puts on a half crab, and he puts it on halfway.
Yes. So that would be a quarter crab if you're keeping track at home.
After more figure four and boring chants, then we get 3 spinning toe holds. Then he applies the figure four. Ringo quits
immediately to 0 crowd reaction.
No reaction.
Which that is the tell that our figure four yeller, it was option 3.
Yes.
Because if he was a big Greg the Hammer Valentine fan, we would have heard him because there was no one else making noise. If he was a big figure four fan, the second the figure four got locked on, he would have popped and we would have heard it because, again, there was no crowd noise. So clearly the feeling he had was relief that this match was over, much like us.
Likewise, yeah. 5 minutes, 46 seconds, 5 minutes too long. After commercial, no, Hammer is here to do an interview with Pat Patterson. Come on.
And the Grand Wizard. So you thought you were done. This is even, and you talk about the match going long. This promo, there was a point where it ended and then it started again. It was terrible. My favorite part of this was Pat Patterson calling Greg the Hammer Valentine, and I quote, Mr. Valentine. He said that over and over again. But Greg Valentine tries to cut this intimidating promo talking about Bob Backlund should give him the belt right now.
Yeah, Bob
Best
Backlund
part of this
is the WWF champion. This is the first time we've heard about the WWF championship at all on this show, and this is the first mention of it is Hammer calling out Bob Backlund here,
who he also calls Howdy Doody, which was good. I got a kick out of that. He right before that, though, I don't know if you caught this. We see from the left side of the camera, like on the opposite side of the ring, we see a kid get up and start walking, and then the next thing we hear is a kid saying, I don't know if he just got right up to the camera. He goes, "Hey man, hey man." That was fun. That was better. He cut a better promo here than Greg the Hammer Valentine did. He says it for 2 years. The telephone lines have been burning up between me and this man, the Grand Wizard, and he brought me in to do one thing: beat Bobby Backlund. And then
how hideously boring would a Bob Backlund Hammer Valentine match be in 1981? Completely unwatchable. I can't fathom it. Get your tickets to the Garden now to go see Bob Backlund and Hammer Valentine. Ugh.
That would be, again, to use your wording, that would be the Kirkland's version of Ricky Steamboat versus Ric Flair. He does have, well, then the best part too is we get some what was it? God, I'm drawing a blank. What was the guy's name from it was Jesse Barr. We get some strong Jesse Barr vibes here.
Good call. That's a good call.
As Craig Valentine starts talking on the money and the women and the expensive clothes. And I'm like, dude,
Get
you
out
are
of here.
Greg the Hammer Valentine. Lean into just being like a hard-nosed, boring wrestler. No one is buying that you're like in a limo with 4 women out on the town.
No.
That is not it. He then says, there's fear in your heart. The fear of Greg Valentine. That was the point where like it had ended. The promo had ended and then it restarted because Patterson just wasn't good at his job.
No, in the Grand Wizard, this is where he cuts the surprisingly bad promo. I'm like, well, here, this is where he's going to save the show. No, the Grand Wizard's a terrible promo. What is going on here? I was blown away. I had to go. I went to Wikipedia after this to find out like how the Grand Wizard was a thing. And I was surprised to learn that he actually the Grand Wizard died less than 2 years later, October of '83, from a heart attack. So just under 2 years from when this show takes place, he was 57 years old.
No.
Yeah, when he died. So he's 55
he was only
here.
55 here?
Yes, unbelievable.
No one could have convinced me that he was a day under 80.
Sure.
And I'm not, again, like, that's fine. But it is shocking to me that he was 55 years old here.
Me too. I have a lot of exclamation points in my notes. I was very shocked. After commercial, there's two guys in the ring. And we have Joe Cox versus King Kong Mosca. Every time I hear King Kong, I say Bundy in my head, but I'm always interrupted with Mosca during this match.
Yes. Do you recall that we saw King Kong Mosca as, I believe it's Angelo Mosca and his son on, was it that Starrcade show, or maybe it was the last, or maybe it was the Boogie Jam show.
Yeah, it was that or Starrcade 86. I can't remember.
Because the thing that I noted from that show, and I immediately noted again here, is that King Kong Mosca is a 6 foot tall Andre the Giant.
Yes.
He looks exactly like him in the face. They have the exact same haircut. It always freaks me out. It did back then. I was literally only a couple months old at this point, but just back then, meaning anytime I saw him when I was younger, it still does now. His opponent, Joe Cox, the best way I can describe him is if you cross a New Japan Young Lion with a back marker in 80s NASCAR.
This is the first legit crowd reaction of the entire show. And
for Joe Cox!
And it happens here. Cox.
They go nuts for him getting offense here, which is also amazing because his offense is god awful.
It's so bad.
He hits a passable drop kick.
Yep.
Then he goes for a single leg takedown that is so bad that he ends up getting taken down in executing this takedown. He just falls. But he takes him down. He's hitting mounted punches and the crowd is going nuts. But everything he does, like these punches are, I'm struggling to even figure out or think of another wrestler to describe, or to compare, I should say, to describe how bad and how weak and ineffectual these punches looked.
No, but this is the first time we've seen like fire from anybody. It's jobber fire, but it's still like fire, and so the people got behind it. And was
it a deal where nobody got offense on King Kong Mosca? Was he so hated that the idea of this this NASCAR driver wannabe in the ring, hitting moves with this bad short haircut and his mustache, that this was still enough to fire the crowd up? Like, I want to know more about why this was the thing that got people going here.
My guess was that, everything we've seen is just like heel squashes so far. You haven't, and like brutal squashes, like to where like there was no offense from a guy you'd like to see win, or like you'd like to see anybody beat up on, even briefly, the heels that you want to boo. And so like here, this is the first time anybody that the crowd wanted to see get offense got some offense, and that's a very good point.
Well, and it's a very good point, because those first couple of matches, those jobbers, they were not following the Ricky Steamboat rule of like, don't take more than 4 or 5 moves without at least, when you're on your knees, throwing a punch to the stomach just to show that you're still alive and give the crowd a little bit of hope. It was nothing. So no, that's most likely what the deal was here, but it just shows again how little hope the crowd was given up to this point. If this offense,
this was it,
because I cannot stress enough how terrible his punches were. You honestly, you can't. You have to seek this out to see how bad it was. Words cannot do it justice.
Mosca rolls him over and misses an elbow drop. Cox then gets to lay in more shots to Mosca, and what was great the entire time, no commentary for any of this. All you heard were people cheering from the start of this match until Mosca takes over. They start trading shots. Mosca gets the advantage, and now the commentary comes back in.
Yes, no, that definitely, yeah, they laid out because we actually had a crowd reaction, which had not happened yet to this point. And when we say that, again, outside of the few people like yelling insults, nobody was even booing the heels. Like they were in a room, wrestling was happening, but there was really no relationship between the two things up until this point on the show. We also had a weird production moment where Masuka is sort of like doing a double-handed choke with Joe Cox on the mat. We get this extreme close-up of Joe Cox being choked on the ground. It was just a strange deal. We then, as you said, the commentary picks up. Pat Patterson talks about, says you should walk over and ask King Kong Masuka for an autograph and you'll find out how mean he is. And he starts going on this diatribe that Vince kind of cuts off about like the fans not thinking that the bad guys are as mean as they really are.
And this is when that jerk starts blowing the whistle and keeps blowing it. It's so annoying. Could you imagine having to sit next to that guy at the show?
Well, what I was thinking was that John Tolos had time traveled back from his brief time managing Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect, as the coach, and was here to manage King Kong Masuka. I don't know if luckily or unluckily that was not the case. The other thing that I thought was really weird here is that King Kong Masuka does the same thing that Killer Khan did earlier, in that he gets the pin, but then he pulls the guy up before he can kick out. And Vince, I guess, was just, he'd seen enough of this earlier on in the show because he goes, oh, come on. And then he explains that apparently King Kong Masuka has been disqualified for this before, which begs the question, why is Killer Khan allowed to do this, but King Kong Masuka is not?
Cox is able to fire back. He's giving Masuka all he can handle.
Which is, Masuka can handle a lot. What Cox can give him is not much.
Aha! Cox hammering on Masuka again. Licks his eyes. Again. To the ropes. Cox setting him up. Drop kick misses.
After missing a drop kick, Masuka in control. Shoulder to the midsection in the corner. More forearms. Slam. Knee to the chest. This is where Masuka picked him back up. He did it again. This was really annoying. Grinds his knee to the small of the back of Cox. Another backbreaker for the 3 count.
Did you notice that for the 3 count, I actually thought this was great and maybe my favorite thing on the show. So if you think about the referee at this point, he's seen this guy pull his opponent up a couple times when he could have pinned him. And so when Masuka hits the backbreaker, the ref gives it a fast count to get to the 3 and get this match over and save the jobber. I loved that.
4 minutes, 23 seconds. In looking at Masuka, he retired from wrestling in the mid-1980s, became a color commentator for the WWF TV tapings in Ontario. He was a color commentator from August of 84 until January of 85, and he is actually the winner of the Wrestling Observer Newsletter Award for Worst Television Announcer in 1984.
Wow, and he did it without a full year. That's quite the illustrious run of like 4.5 months, 5 months, if my math is correct. So quite the auspicious career for Angelo Masuka, King Kong Masuka on the mic. I did like how Vince McMahon said when this match ended, Joe Cox gave him a match.
That he did. After commercial, we're told we're going to get so ring announcer Gary Michael Capetta is making this announcement for this match. It's an Australian-style tag team match.
Wrestling fans, the following attraction set for one fall with a 15-minute time limit. It is an Australian-style tag team match. Introducing team number 1 to my left, from Kansas City, Missouri, 254 pounds, Davey O'Hannon. His partner, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, 267 pounds, Ron Shaw. Their opponents for this contest, they are the former World Wrestling Federation champions from Auckland, New Zealand, 246 pounds, Tony Garea. his tag team partner from Quebec City, Canada, 244 pounds, Rick Martel.
Why did he not make that announcement about the opening tag team match?
It sure seemed like the same style to me.
The rule set was the same. Yes, this was the former tag team champions, Tony Garea and Rick Martel. I loved their gear. They had matching 80s track jackets, matching blue and red trunks and boots, but they were reversed for each guy. So if it was mostly blue with a little bit of red, on the other end, it was mostly red and a little bit of blue. I noted that, I believe it was Tony Garea had the red with a little bit of blue. How much he looked, just if you close your eyes, maybe you took your glasses off, I guess you'd have to have your eyes open. If you took your glasses off, he looked like Steven Regal with that gear.
Yeah, I did like that. I love anytime a team has coordinated gear. This was a good example here. And their opponents, Davey O'Hannon and Ron Shaw.
Do you remember Ron Shaw was the guy in that Battle Royal?
Battle Royal with Inoki?
Yes, the guy that we were like, who is this Ron Shaw? This was Ron Shaw here in 1981. I don't know what this says about me as a person, but I got so excited when I recognized that this was Ron Shaw. And Ron Shaw, he looks pretty much exactly what you'd expect Ron Shaw to look like. I noted that he looks so much like it's basically like if you threw present day Don Callis in trunks and told him to go out there and be a jobber, he would look like Ron Shaw here in 1981.
Definitely a good comp. So confirmed, 0 men in this match are from Australia. So I'm still trying to figure out what this Australian style tag match means. We'll see as it goes along. O'Hannon starts with Garea, and this is my kind of jobber. This guy, O'Hannon, he's trying so hard. He's running as fast as he can, but he's inept. He does a great job of like conveying the try hard look. Lots of jobbers, they hang the not interested sign, but this guy is trying his heart out, and I loved it. And he was constantly inept when he was trying to do it. It was great.
Well, yes, it's the combination of those two things that makes a great jobber. It's a guy who has all the want to and none of the ability.
Yes. So O'Hannon is one of my favorite jobbers I didn't know I loved. It was all Garea here with arm drags, kicks him away, slams him down. Ron Shaw tags in. Martel tags in as well. Now, Rick Martel, 1981, he's on another level here. He does bang, 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 fast-paced offense, which is completely different from the slow and plodding style everyone else is working on this show. Completely different pace.
Oh, he looked fantastic here. He looked like he was beamed in from another century compared to the rest of these guys. Just perpetual motion, which I believe they say at one point, and it's absolutely accurate. He looks great. Everything he does is well executed. The crowd goes nuts for him because here's this put together, good looking dude who's actually doing exciting pro wrestling.
Martel back to the ropes, tags Garea. Shaw winds up for a big punch, but Garea grabs the arm of Shaw and takes him down. I love that tag team wrestling. Shaw catches Garea with a hip toss, and it looks like he panics and just tries to cover him quick, and a kick out by Garea. So the jobber got in a move, didn't know how to follow it up, and just panicked and tried to cover him. So I do love my inept jobbers here.
Yes. By the way, as you've been describing the action, I've done some research and tried to find the exact answer for what Australian style or Australian rules tag team wrestling is. It's a bit of a murky subject. You see some references where it's just that's what tag matches are called, but you see other references where in the WWF, the predecessor to the WWF, that Australian rules denoted 2 out of 3 falls. There's also some indication that some territories use Australian rules to describe basically a Texas Tornado or a tornado style tag match where you didn't have to make tags, where it was all 4 men. There's also a version of Australian rules referenced in Mexican wrestling and Lucha Libre, which basically is that, you don't have to make tags. So I don't know, but
so it's guaranteed it's none of those things you just described. This
pretty
is just
much
a regular it's every tag match you've ever seen.
Other than the first thing that I said, which is that it was just a tag match. There's also some thought that the going back to calling it this goes back to the Fabulous Kangaroos, one of the legendary early tag teams in professional wrestling. So I don't believe there's a definitive answer, but those
when the tag team champions wrestled early, it was not an Australian style tag team match, and those matches were exactly the same.
Exactly. But what this tells me is if this was an Australian style tag team match and the opener wasn't, the results of this match were inconsequential as to the rankings, the positioning, to get to the tag team titles. And if there's anything we learned going back to the Smoky Mountain episode, it's that rankings are very important.
This is a contenders match.
Yes.
Martel's back in. The heels double team Martel, who tries to fire up, and the people are behind him. He takes an elbow from Shaw on the apron. Great selling here by Martel for the less than a minute that the jobbers got some control. More double teaming. We get another backbreaker. Jeez, every single match, it's just the move of the bad guys is the backbreaker.
That is the move of the territory for sure.
Gurria keeps coming in, resulting in the double team on Martel. They're choking Martel with the tag rope, which is always a spot I appreciate in tag team wrestling. Sunset Flip gets a good reaction, and he makes the hot tag to Tony Gurria. I'm like,
Gurria, to his credit, Gurria is a house of fire here. Yes, you would expect that if you're going to have a hot tag, it would be to Rick Martel. But the flip side of that is the other of the two, by far, the guy who is a better seller and can garner more sympathy getting beaten down is Rick Martel.
Yeah, it's only for a second, though, because all 4 men start fighting. Shaw and O'Hannon get run into each other.
As Vince McMahon yells, and I quote, "Together!"
Gurria grabs the downed Shaw's legs, rolls forward, gets the pin. 3 count for Martel, and Gurria are your winners.
How about Gary Michael Capetta? He was particularly verbose here as he says, and I quote, "Your winners, still one of the most exciting tag teams in the world today.
Little editorial.
Tony Gurria and Rick Martel."
5 minutes, 20 seconds.
He's not a ring announcer as much as he's a hype man.
Martel and Gurria were unable to recapture the belts. All we heard about was them wanting to regain the belts from Fuji and Saito, but they were unable to recapture the belts. Martel left the WWF in April of 1982.
I would too if I could not recapture a championship from Mr. Fuji.
Yes, he would go on to wrestle in the AWA before returning to the WWF in 1986. After commercial, the time limit was announced for this match as till the curfew.
Yes, 1 fall to the curfew.
Blassie's introduced first again.
Yes. I should have been prepared for this, but it got me again.
It got me again.
I had no short-term memory of what we saw. I think part of it was because even though this was an hour television show, it felt like it was 6 hours. So I had kind of forgotten or blocked out the beginning of the show.
Then Jeff Craney gets introduced.
This man, this is what I want out of jobbers. Jeff Craney, but it's spelled, I believe, like cranny. That's how I wrote it anyway. I don't know if it was. I'm hoping that if he actually was not a jobber in another territory, he had a tag team partner that was named Nook, and they were Nook and Cranny. But I assume we were not lucky enough to get that. But he has this amazing permed long hair. He has a mustache and he has maroon gear. in a not particularly athletic body.
His opponent, the man we've been waiting for, the golden boy, Adrian Adonis. Yes. I'm very excited.
Yes, and the best way there's a few ways you can describe Adrian Adonis here visually. I wrote down that he looks like if Dick Slater was a New York City street punk, or if Rod Stewart was a wrestler.
Yeah, he's got like a black leather jacket on, black leather gloves. The back of his jacket says "I Heart Adrian," like instead of "I Heart New York."
His style actually seemed inspired by, or maybe it influenced Madonna.
It was very, very cool look, and definitely unique for this show. This is the first personality on this show.
The first guy that actually seemed like a larger than life character in any way. He used this metaphor, this description a few times that like this show was actually in color. So don't get me wrong, but it felt like maybe other than Rick Martel, everybody else in the show you were watching on some like staticky black and white feed. And then, Adonis comes out and whoa, man, we're in Technicolor now. We're actually, we're seeing something.
This guy had I was like, where? Rick Martel, the only other human being on this show with charisma,
yes.
And Adonis had all the rest of the charisma for the
and significantly more than Rick Martel. When he took his jacket off, like you could see, so he was so much smaller than he would be, many years later as a very overweight sort of comedy character. But you could see how like this was a guy who could get really heavy later on. He's not huge, but he's also like, this isn't a guy that looks like Rick Rude physically.
No, but he's in the best. He's in like fantastic shape for Adrian Adonis standards. Like,
it's the best shape he could be in. Yeah. And he's, and again, when we talk about, and we'll get into the match now specifically, the thing I really noticed or realized here is that Adrian Adonis absolutely belongs in my all movement Hall of Fame for wrestlers.
Yes.
I've talked about before guys like Arn Anderson, Terry Funk, Barry Windham, the Great Muta, guys that you could dim the lights. You could throw a burlap sack over them and just tell them to walk around the ring and you would immediately know who they are. Adrian Adonis, that guy here, just a completely unique, just captivating way of moving around the ring. We've said it so many times. I just want to see more and more and more of Adrian Adonis from this era.
Yeah, he starts with just an explosive, quick takedown. And because, again, he's a bigger guy. You don't think he's going to be this agile. And, yeah, just explodes with a quick takedown. He throws him shoulder first into the buckle. Big leg
part
drop.
Of what's so cool about Adrian Adonis, and it's something that Pat Patterson brings up, and really the only time he contributes anything to the broadcast, he talks about how Adrian Adonis is an accomplished amateur wrestler. He has a great background. He could have been an amateur standout, but he always got in trouble, and so that's why he never, achieved that level of greatness in the amateur ranks. But it's what makes him such a unique wrestler in the ring is that he's such an outlandish, over the top character, but he's this like down and dirty, like tough fighter. It's a really cool character. The other thing that I noted is like, if you wanted to imagine what Shawn Michaels would be with bad genetics.
Yes. Great.
It is Adrian Adonis. Like there's so much of that, particularly that like immediately post heel turn Shawn Michaels.
Yep.
There's so much of that there that he cribbed from early 80s Adrian Adonis.
And yeah, they give you the backstory of the character here, like, oh yeah, because he's eccentric with this leather jackets and and the look that he's got, the way he carries himself. Yeah, he's got all the athletic skill to be a championship caliber amateur wrestler, but he just kept getting in fights and he spent too much time in the streets of New York, and that lifestyle took him away from the athletics. But now he's combined the two to make this character. This is who he is. He gets to do the wrestling he's so good at, but he's also a down and dirty street fighter from all the tricks he's learned growing up in New York. So like, that's a cool thing. Like, I believe this. This is a believable character.
Well, exactly. It's a great idea for a character, and then it works because it's 100% believable. Because he can absolutely back it up in the ring, and oh my God, can he back it up as that character? He just jumps off the screen, as I said. So you're not trying to give a guy something that he doesn't have. You're taking what he has, and the classic overused phrase of turning it to 11 couldn't be more accurately described here.
He hits a standing drop kick. Adrian Adonis does.
Incredible. Awesome. Standing drop kick right to the face.
And then we just get a lot of fire and intensity. A power slam by Adonis.
Yeah, this nice, it was like a running avalanche style power slam. He hits a rude awakening style neck breaker.
Picture perfect neck breaker. This was a dictionary definition of how you do that rude awakening.
This was the point where I also noticed he had these beautiful, outlandish, ostentatious, multicolored boots that I loved as well.
Oh, and yeah, the fans did not care for those boots either.
No, there were things that you definitely could not repeat on this podcast and never would. It was a different time here in 1981, and the fans were taking full advantage of the fact that it was a different time.
Sleeper by Adonis. He gets the quick win. He struts around celebrating after.
Well, he gets the quick win at the sleeper, and he sings the song "Good Night, Irene."
He sings "Good Night, Irene" yeah.
As he puts the man to sleep via the sleeper hold. Just a god among men here.
Only 2 minutes and 52 seconds. I was robbed. This was too short, but I was so while I was mad that this match was over, I then got happy again because in 1981 you needed to wake up the guy after a sleeper, yes. Otherwise he dies. Yes. So
exactly. It's wrestling physics. It's part of the handbook in 1981.
A good slap to the back does it, but Adonis instead chops him to the back, and then the show goes off the air. I was robbed of more Adonis. Adrian Adonis. He died July 4th, 1988 in a car accident. He was only 34 years old at the time of his death.
Jesus. So he was only 27 here.
Yes. Unbelievable. So what a talent. It's too bad that so I hope we get more. The randomizers teased us now with 2 short Adrian Adonis appearances, but it was a weird end to the show. It just kind of faded off. Nobody signed off. Yeah,
no, there was no sign off. There was no Gordon Solie at the table recapping what we've seen and telling us to go to the arena in Ocala on Saturday. None of that. It was just the match ended. We got no sign off from Vince, nothing from Pat Patterson. It was just over, which in some ways is completely fitting for this show because I don't think I've ever seen a less inspired, not only the matches, most of the matches until we got to the last 2 were just absolutely nothing, but just a less inspired format for a show.
This show was nothing.
It was just we have an hour that we have to put on, and so we're going to put on a show and put zero effort. And I've been talking about the wrestlers, and some of them were definitely guilty of that too. But just from a production standpoint, my overarching thought was, what was the purpose of this show?
I was just about to say that because go back to our world-class show that we reviewed. Go back to the Championship Wrestling from Florida. We were joking around that we knew the house show loop that they were about to do because
even Smoky Mountain,
they were pushing these shows. They were building to big shows. This was obviously pre-pay-per-view events, but they would have the big house show events they were building to or attractions. I didn't hear one thing about Madison Square Garden. How is that possible? I didn't hear anything about what was coming to the Garden.
The Monday Night Raw show that, if you're listening in linear fashion, was our most recent show. Even on that, they told us that the one Billy Gunn will be in Charlotte this Saturday.
Right.
They put more effort there on Monday Night Raw in 2000 to tell us what was coming up on house shows than they did here on this All Star Wrestling show. There was no rundown of the loop, as you said, no build to anything. The closest thing we got was that Greg Valentine wants to maybe at some point wrestle Bobby Backlund.
Yeah,
that was it. And that maybe Tony Gurria and Rick Martel will go after their tag titles again. Maybe. No promises, though.
No promises, and that might not come to your town. We
Yes.
were not going to tell you when or where we're going to be or what's going to happen. This is the first time the randomizer has pulled something that I really did not care for. This show I did not like. I do not like the format of the show. I did not like the experience is not enjoyable. 1981 WWF syndicated TV. This show was not enjoyable. The format was bad. It seemed like everybody was put out that this show had to happen. Like the fans were put out that this show had to happen. Vince and Pat Patterson were put out that this show had to happen. Real bummer here that we got to do this. And I'm like, no, can we have some fun at a wrestling show, please?
It felt like having an important work meeting at 4:00 on a Friday. That's
who
what this
scheduled
was.
this show at 4
Exactly.
God.
Exactly. It just, there was nothing there. I will say that if the one thing we did get was we got Adrian Adonis. We got prime Adrian Adonis. If we did not have that last, I would say 4 minutes of the show between his introduction, the match, and him waking Jeff Craney up after putting him to sleep. If we didn't have that, we would have gotten absolutely nothing from the show. I would not have felt like my life was enriched at all by spending this hour watching this wrestling program. But
I think we both agree that our favorite thing on the show is Adrian Adonis by a mile.
By far. And in a weird way, this might be, of any podcast we've done, the instance where the favorite thing is so far and away better and ahead from every other thing on the show.
Yeah, honorable mention to Rick Martel.
Yes.
If we had no Adrian Adonis on the show, we would have been spending this time talking about Rick Martel as the only other thing we enjoyed. And Mr. Saito, also an honorable mention. But everything else is just garbage, just trash.
Yes, and again, all of those things are stretches. The things that we're saying are great outside of Adrian Adonis. Like, he was great. That 4 minutes was awesome. But like, it was cool to see Rick Martel do Rick Martel things. But on any other show, it just would have been a squash match on a show. Would not have stood out. It was very cool to see Mr. Saito in the opening, but more like, hey, that's Mr. Saito. It's cool.
Sure.
Like, that was about the extent of it. Not a whole lot else here. Worst thing on the show. I mean, I think honestly, it's just the show. I think it's the format, the production, and just the atmosphere. It was just that professional wrestling, more than anything else, is supposed to be fun. You're supposed to enjoy it. And I don't have to put smiles on people's faces. I'm not saying that, but like, at the end of the day, even if the stuff that like grips you emotionally and like, you lose yourself in it and might even piss you off, but still, like, it's all like variations on fun. This was the most joyless show I've ever watched.
Me too. Yeah, it was just like, oh, yeah.
And it felt like, that's why, I think that's also why the Adrian Adonis thing stood out so much, because it was like, even though this guy's a heel, I'm like, wow, like he feels like he might actually be enjoying doing his job here. Like, when he left, it was like, oh man, like, I want to do this again tomorrow. And I did not get the sense from anybody else other than Rick Martel on this show.
Yeah, worst thing on the show for me was that guy with the whistle. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, or the bird calls during the Greg Valentine match. Although I think you probably appreciated that.
So yeah, with that, I think we're gonna wrap it up. Yeah, don't watch this show. It's
watch the last 4 minutes so you can see Adrian Adonis for real. Because if you've never seen him from this time period, it will open your eyes and blow your mind, and you'll want to go down an Adrian Adonis rabbit hole from like the best time of his career. Because honestly, like, I'm sure I'm probably going too far here, but when I saw him at the end of this show, I thought, man, like, this guy could have been somebody's Ric Flair.
He would have been like, like he could have been that Terry Funk, Dick Slater type of guy with just like that ton of charisma, and that just a unique style. He would have had his own style, but I love the comp to that early heel turn Shawn Michaels, because like he had that kind of flamboyant flash and a lot of similar look and feel. So yeah, no, those are all great comps. I want to go down a rabbit hole of this stuff. If you went to like Google Images, you're like, God, who is that Adrian Adonis? You go and you pull up an image of Adrian Adonis, you're gonna see like the flower shop era Adrian Adonis.
Yes.
And you're gonna see like the heavy comedy figure, and that's not this guy. That's not what we saw here, and who he was in this early career. I would have loved to have seen him and Jesse Ventura as a tag team. They're the East-West connection.
Oh, one other quick description I could give for him, just in your mind's eye, going back to Shawn Michaels again, like. He's Shawn Michaels if Shawn Michaels won the fight at the bar in Syracuse.
Right. Yeah, so definitely go down in early 80s Adrian Adonis rabbit hole, because I'm going to treat myself to that at some point, because it's definitely worth it. So that's the only thing worth it on this show.
Yes.
Stay away from All Star Wrestling. Maybe there's better shows. Tell us what you think. If you agree with our assessment of this or not, or if there's anything we missed, we want to hear about your experience listening to this show and anything around this time.
Well, maybe you're a hardcore All-Star Wrestling fan, and maybe you want to subscribe to the Patreon, to the bonus audio tier, and maybe you want to give us another episode of All-Star Wrestling to watch to try to convince us that it's actually a great underrated territory.
You can do that all at patreon.com/wrestling@random. Send us your feedback on this show. Tell us what you think. We want to interact with you again at wrestle@random on Twitter. Same for the Instagram, facebook.com/wrestling@random, and wrestling@random.com at Gmail, wrestling@random@gmail.com. All those links are at wrestling@random.com. The entire back catalog. Make sure that you support us if you can't do it financially through the Patreon, we get it in these times, totally fine. You can support us by subscribing to the podcast. You can do it by telling your wrestling fan friends about us, showing them how to subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends that used to be wrestling fans. We're talking about stuff from back in the day. They might be interested in taking a trip down memory lane with us as well.
Tell your former friends about the podcast, because just imagine, you tell them like, hey, I know we haven't talked in a while, and maybe you don't like me anymore, but I know you're a wrestling fan, and I've got this great show for you to watch. It's All-Star Wrestling from Halloween night in 1981. And then they watch it, and then they're really mad at you. They send you a message back, but you say, just wait, before you just never talk to me again, here's a link to a podcast about it.
That's right.
Try that out.
And with that, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank everyone for listening. Thanks for joining us, Adam.
Thank you, Jeremy. This show, watching it, made me feel like I was in the crowd in a in a strange way, because I felt as though I was reacting on this podcast like a lot of those people were in the crowd. There was not a lot to do. You kind of had to amuse yourself, find things to be entertained by. I did not bring my kazoo for the podcast. I did not do a bird call, but we all made it through. And in the end, we were rewarded by Adrian Adonis. So it all works out.
Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk to you again next time.